There are moments in a man's life when he feels the weight of generations resting on his shoulders. You may think your financial struggles are your own private burden, but they are not. You carry the hopes, failures, and silent prayers of those who came before you. And whether you know it or not, you were chosen to break what defeated them. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another motivational story, it's a spiritual blueprint that transformed me from a man crushed by generational poverty into the chosen, one who rewrote my family's financial destiny forever. This is the story of how I discovered that the weight I carried wasn't a curse, but a calling, and how that calling changed everything. I want you to take a moment and really feel the weight I'm talking about. It's not just the physical weight of bills and responsibilities. It's something deeper, something almost spiritual. It's the heaviness in your chest when you look at your children and worry about their future. It's the ache in your soul when you see your parents aging without the comfort they deserve. It's the silent burden of knowing that somehow, some way, you're supposed to break a cycle that has persisted in your family for generations, maybe even centuries. This weight I'm describing is not random. It's not accidental. It's sacred. It's the weight of destiny calling you to something greater than yourself. And the fact that you feel it means you're already on the path to breaking it. Many people go through life oblivious to this calling, content to maintain the status quo, to accept what has always been. But not you. You feel it. You sense it. And that feeling is the first sign that you've been chosen for something extraordinary. In the next 3 hours, I'm going to take you on a journey through the spiritual principles that transformed my life and can transform yours. We'll explore the hidden patterns that govern families, the unseen forces that shape our financial destinies, and the divine laws that, when understood and applied, can break generational curses and create generational blessings. This isn't just theory, it's practical, applicable wisdom that has the power to rewrite your family's financial story forever. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of financial struggles that seem to extend beyond your own life, if you've ever wondered why you carry burdens that others don't seem to face, or if you've ever sensed that you were meant for something greater than the circumstances you were born into, then hit that like button and subscribe. Because today, I'm going to reveal the spiritual principles that can transform generational curses into generational blessings. This isn't just my story, it might be yours too. The burden of divine selection, I still remember the night it all became clear to me. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay, feeling the familiar weight of anxiety pressing down on my chest. My phone buzzed, another collection agency. My mother had called earlier, asking if I could help with her medical bills. My younger brother needed money for college textbooks. The weight felt unbearable, crushing. But that night, something shifted. As I looked at the faces and old family photographs on my wall, my grandfather who worked 2 jobs until he died at 62, my grandmother who took in sewing to make ends meet, my own parents who never owned a home, I realized something profound. This wasn't just my struggle. This was a pattern, a chain that had been passed down through generations, invisible but unbreakable. And in that moment of realization, I felt something else stir within me, not despair, but purpose. Not burden, but calling. That night marked the beginning of my journey to understand why the weight always falls on the strongest back. Why responsibility always finds the one who is tired yet refuses to quit. I discovered that destiny never selects the weakest vessel. It selects the one with the inner fire to act while everyone else hesitates. My family saw something in me they did not see in themselves. They saw the one who dreamed bigger, who tried harder, who refused to settle, even if they never said it. They expected me to succeed. They expected me to rise. They expected me to carry what they could not. Their silence was not ignorance. It was dependence. Let me paint you a more vivid picture of that night, because it's in these moments of crisis that destiny reveals itself. The kitchen was small, with cracked linoleum floors and a single fluorescent light that hummed and flickered, casting harsh shadows on the piles of mail scattered across the table. Most of it was Bill's credit card statements with minimum payments I couldn't meet. Utility notices threatening disconnection. Medical bills for my mother's recent hospital stay. Each envelope represented a choice between paying one bill or another, never both. Each letter was a reminder of how far behind I had fallen. The phone had been ringing all evening, but I'd let it go to voicemail. I knew who it was. The same collection agency that called every day like clockwork. Their automated message, polite but firm about the consequences of non-payment. I'd become adept at screening calls, living in a state of constant low-grade anxiety that spiked whenever the phone rang or someone knocked on the door. Earlier that day, my mother had called. Her voice was strained as she explained that the insurance wouldn't cover all of her latest treatment. She needed help with the remaining balance. I could hear the shame in her voice, the reluctance to ask for help she knew I couldn't provide. "It's okay, Mom," I'd said, my own voice tight with the effort to sound reassuring. "I'll figure something out." As I hung up, I had no idea what that something would be. Then my brother had texted, asking if I could help with his textbooks for the upcoming semester. He was the first in our family to go to college, and we were all so proud of him. But pride doesn't pay tuition, and his part-time job barely covered his living expenses. "Sure, buddy," I texted back, immediately wondering which bill I wouldn't pay this month to make it happen. As I sat there that night, the weight of it all felt physical, like an actual pressure on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt trapped, cornered, with no good options. Every path forward seemed to lead to more debt, more disappointment, more failure. And then my eyes fell on the old photographs taped to the wall above the table. There was my grandfather, a stern-looking man in a work uniform, his hands calloused from years of manual labor. He'd worked 2 jobs for as long as anyone could remember: construction during the day, security at night. He'd died of a heart attack at 62, still working, still struggling, still hoping for a breakthrough that never came. Next to him was my grandmother, with her kind eyes and tired smile. She'd taken in sewing and laundry from neighbors to supplement my grandfather's income. I remembered visiting her as a child. The perpetual smell of soap and starch in her small apartment. The sewing machine always running, her fingers pricked and bleeding from long hours of work. Then there was my parents on their wedding day, young, hopeful, standing in front of a car they'd bought with money they didn't really have. They'd never owned a home, moving from rental to rental as landlords raised prices or sold properties. They'd worked hard, my father in factories, my mother in retail, but they'd never gotten ahead. They'd retired with barely enough to survive. Their dreams of travel and comfort replaced by the reality of Social Security and Medicare. Looking at these faces, I suddenly saw something I'd never noticed before. It wasn't just that they had struggled financially. It was the pattern of that struggle. The same choices. The same limitations. The same acceptance of this is just how things are repeated generation after generation. My grandfather worked hard, but never learned to make money work for him. My grandmother saved every penny, but never learned to invest. My parents avoided debt, but also avoided risk, keeping them trapped in financial mediocrity. And then I saw myself in that pattern. I was working hard just like them. I was avoiding debt just like them. I was playing it safe just like them. And I was getting the same results they got, just enough to survive, never enough to thrive. In that moment of recognition, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a dramatic lightning bolt moment, not at first. It was quieter, more subtle. A question formed in my mind: what if this isn't just my struggle? What if I'm carrying something that belongs to my whole family line? The thought was so clear, so distinct, that it startled me. I looked around the small kitchen, at the cracked walls and worn appliances, at the piles of bills representing years of financial struggle, and I wondered, could it be that I wasn't just dealing with my own poor choices or bad luck? Could it be that I was dealing with something inherited, something passed down like DNA or family traits? As I sat with this possibility, a strange feeling began to replace the anxiety in my chest. It was a sense of recognition, of something clicking into place. The weight I'd been carrying suddenly felt different. Not just a burden, but a responsibility. Not just a problem, but a purpose. I thought about how my family had always looked to me, even when they didn't say it out loud. How my mother would mention my name when talking about her hopes for the future. How my father would ask my opinion on financial matters, even though he was the parent and I was the child. How my brother and cousins seemed to watch my choices. As if testing the waters of possibilities they couldn't yet imagine for themselves. Their silence wasn't ignorance. It was dependence. They were waiting for someone to break the pattern, to show them a different way, to prove that the family story didn't have to end the way it had always ended. And somehow, they had chosen me. This realization didn't make my problems disappear. The bills were still there, the responsibilities still real, but something fundamental had changed in how I viewed them. They weren't just my problems anymore. They were the problems of my lineage, and I was the one chosen to solve them. That night, I didn't find a magical solution to my financial troubles, but I found something more important. I found my calling. I discovered that the weight I carried wasn't a curse, but a selection. Destiny had chosen me for a task greater than the comforts of ordinary life. And though I trembled beneath it, I somehow knew that I would never be given less strength than the weight required. As I delved deeper into understanding my family's financial patterns, I began to see the invisible chains that had bound us for generations. The poverty patterns, the missed opportunities, the lack of guidance, the fear around money, the silence around ambition. These patterns did not begin with me. They had been passed down like invisible chains, and now those chains had reached me because I was the one strong enough to break them. I looked at my family line with new eyes. I saw how my grandfather had worked his fingers to the bone but never learned to make money work for him. I saw how my grandmother had saved every penny but never learned to invest. I saw how my parents had avoided debt but also avoided risk, keeping them trapped in financial mediocrity. They did the best they could with the knowledge they had, but the knowledge was incomplete. No one had taught them the laws of wealth. No one had shown them the principles of financial freedom. They had inherited not just poverty, but a poverty mindset. And as I looked at my own life, I realized I had been repeating their patterns. I was working hard, just like them. I was avoiding debt, just like them. I was playing it safe, just like them. And I was getting the same results they got, just enough to survive, never enough to thrive. Let me take you deeper into this discovery, because understanding these generational patterns is crucial to breaking them. What I began to realize that night was that my family's financial struggles weren't random or isolated incidents. They were part of a larger pattern, set of beliefs and behaviors that had been passed down through generations like a genetic inheritance. The first pattern I identified was what I call the hard work fallacy, the belief that working hard is enough to create wealth. My grandfather worked 2 jobs until the day he died. My father worked overtime whenever it was offered. I had been working multiple jobs since I was 16. Yet none of us had achieved financial freedom. Why? Because we had confused activity with productivity, busyness with effectiveness. We had been working hard, but we hadn't been working smart. We hadn't understood that money doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to strategy, to leverage, to systems. The second pattern was what I call scarcity thinking, the belief that there's never enough. This manifested in different ways across generations. My grandmother, having lived through real poverty, saved every penny but never invested. She was so focused on not losing what she had that she never risked growing it. My parents, afraid of debt, avoided leverage entirely. They saw all debt as dangerous. It's not recognizing the difference between consumer debt that impoverishes and investment debt that enriches. And I had inherited this scarcity mindset too, always operating from a place of fear rather than abundance. It's always focusing on cutting expenses rather than increasing income. The third pattern was what I call financial silence, the unspoken rule that we don't talk about money. In my family, money was a taboo subject, loaded with shame and anxiety. No one taught me about investing, about creating multiple streams of income, about the power of compound interest. Financial education was completely absent, and this silence wasn't just about lack of knowledge. It was about lack of permission to dream bigger, to aim higher, to break out of the predetermined financial boundaries of our family. The fourth pattern was what I call risk aversion, the tendency to choose security over opportunity. My family had a deep-seated fear of losing what little they had, which made them extremely conservative in their financial choices. They preferred the certainty of a small, predictable return to the possibility of a larger, less certain one. They valued stability over growth, safety over freedom. And this risk aversion kept them trapped in financial mediocrity. never taking the calculated risks necessary for wealth creation. The fifth pattern was what I call individualistic struggle, the belief that we have to figure it out on our own. My family prided themselves on being self-reliant, on not asking for help. This independence sounded noble, but in reality, it kept us isolated. We didn't seek mentors. We didn't build networks. We didn't leverage the knowledge and experience of others who had already achieved what we wanted. We were trying to reinvent the wheel, generations starting from scratch rather than building on the wisdom of those who had gone before. As I identified these patterns, I began to see how they had been passed down not through explicit teaching, but through observation, through osmosis, through the subtle cues and messages I had absorbed growing up. I had learned how to think about money, how to feel about money, how to act around money. Not from what my family said, but from what they did, from the emotions they displayed, from the choices they made. And here's what I realized. These patterns weren't just habits. They were part of our family's identity. They were woven into the story we told ourselves about who we were and what was possible for us. People like us don't get rich. Money is hard to come by. You have to work hard for every penny. Be thankful for what you have. These weren't just sayings. They were the invisible architecture of our financial reality. Understanding this was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant I wasn't just dealing with my own financial ignorance and bad habits. I was dealing with generations of accumulated limitations. Liberating because it meant that once I could see these patterns, I could change them. I could break the chain. I also realized something profound. These patterns had reached me because I was the one strong enough to break them. My family had carried these limitations as far as they could. They had done their best with the knowledge and resources they had. But they had reached the limits of what was possible within their current mindset and approach. And somehow, destiny had selected me to take it further, to break through the barriers that had stopped them. This wasn't because I was smarter or more talented than anyone in my family. It was because I was the one who couldn't accept the status quo, the one who felt the pain of the limitations most acutely, the one who was willing to question everything and risk everything for a different outcome. I was the one with the inner fire to act while everyone else hesitated. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by bills I couldn't pay, I didn't find an immediate solution to my financial problems. But I found something more important. I found my purpose. I understood that my struggle wasn't just about me. It was about my entire lineage. And I was the one chosen to break the patterns that had held us captive for generations. This understanding changed everything. It transformed my perspective from victim to victor, from passive recipient to active agent. It gave meaning to my suffering, purpose to my struggle. It awakened in me a sense of responsibility, not just for my own life, but for the lives of those who came before me and those who would come after. The weight I carried was not a curse to be endured, but a calling to be fulfilled. And that realization was the first step on the path to breaking the generational curse and creating a new legacy of financial freedom. The turning point came when I asked myself a life-changing question. What would happen if I didn't break this cycle? The answer terrified me. My children would inherit the same fears I wrestled with now. My siblings would repeat the same financial mistakes. The next generation would watch me live smaller than the greatness burning inside me. That was the nightmare path if I drifted one more year. But then I asked another question. What would happen if I rose? What if I became the one to break these chains? The answer filled me with hope and determination. I imagined the day my family would breathe easier because of my courage. I imagined a household where money was no longer a source of fear but a tool for freedom. I imagined my children seeing abundance instead of anxiety. I imagined the pride in their eyes when they would say, "He changed everything." That vision became my driving force. It gave me the strength to face the truth about my situation and the courage to take the difficult steps needed to change it. Let me take you deeper into this turning point because it's in these moments of decision that destinies are shaped. After that night of realization, I began to see everything differently. The weight I carried wasn't just a burden, it was a responsibility. The struggles I faced weren't just challenges, they were assignments. And the choices I made weren't just about me, they were about generations. The first question I asked myself, What would happen if I didn't break this cycle? Opened a door to a future I couldn't bear to accept. I saw my children growing up with the same financial fears that had paralyzed me. I saw them learning the same limiting beliefs, repeating the same patterns, facing the same obstacles. I saw my siblings continuing to struggle, never quite getting ahead, always wondering why it was so hard. I saw the next generation watching me live smaller than the greatness burning inside me. Learning from my example that dreams are meant to be deferred, that potential is meant to be unrealized. This vision wasn't just a possibility. It was a probability if I continued on the path I was on. It was the logical outcome of the patterns I had identified. The natural conclusion of the story my family had been living for generations. And it terrified me not just because of what it meant for me, but because of what it meant for those I loved. But then I asked the second question. What would happen if I rose? What if I became the one to break these chains? And a completely different future opened up. I imagined a day when my family would breathe easier because of my courage. I pictured conversations around the dinner table where money was discussed openly, without fear or shame. I envisioned a household where financial decisions were made from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, where investments were discussed alongside savings, where opportunities were pursued rather than avoided. I imagined my children growing up with a completely different financial mindset. Instead of learning to fear debt, they would learn to leverage it wisely. Instead of learning to work hard for money, they would learn to make money work hard for them. Instead of learning to play it safe, they would learn to take calculated risks. Instead of learning to accept limitations, they would learn to expand possibilities. Most powerfully, I imagined the pride in their eyes when they would say, "He changed everything." Not because I became wealthy for my own comfort, but because I broke the patterns that had held our family captive. Not because I achieved success for myself, but because I created a new inheritance of financial freedom for them. This vision became my driving force. It was the fuel that would power me through the challenges ahead, the compass that would guide me when I felt lost, the anchor that would hold me steady when storms of doubt and fear arose. It gave me the strength to face the truth about my situation and the courage to take the difficult steps needed to change it. The truth was that I was in a financial mess. I had debt that was accumulating faster than I could pay it off. I had income that was insufficient to cover my basic expenses, let alone build wealth. I had habits that were sabotaging my financial success before I even started. I had beliefs that were limiting my possibilities before I even explored them. The difficult steps involved changing everything about my relationship with money. It meant educating myself about financial principles that had never been taught in my family or schools. It meant developing new habits of saving, investing, and strategic spending. It means confronting my fears around risk and failure. It meant seeking mentors and guidance from those who had achieved what I wanted. It meant being willing to be different, to stand out, to go against the grain of my family's patterns. But the vision of what was possible gave me the courage to take these steps. The image of my family's financial freedom became more compelling than my comfort zone. The dream of breaking generational curses became more important than maintaining the status quo. The calling to create a new legacy became stronger than the fear of change. This is the power of vision. It doesn't just show you what's possible, it gives you the why to pursue it. It doesn't just inspire you, it transforms you. It doesn't just motivate you, it drives you. It becomes the North Star that guides you through the darkest nights of doubt and the stormiest seas of challenge. I want to emphasize something important here. This vision wasn't about escaping my family or rejecting where I came from. It was about honoring my family by taking them where they couldn't go themselves. It was about respecting the sacrifices of those who came before me by building upon their foundation. It was about loving those who would come after me by leaving them a different inheritance than the one I received. The turning point came when I realized that my financial transformation wasn't just about me. It was about my entire lineage. The choices I made would ripple through generations, creating either a legacy of limitation or a legacy of possibility. And I was the one who had to decide which it would be. This understanding changed everything. It elevated my financial journey from a personal goal to a sacred mission. It transformed my struggle from a burden to bear to a calling to fulfill. It shifted my perspective from what's in it for me to what's in it for us, where us included not just my immediate family, but generations past and future. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to take concrete steps toward this vision. I started reading every book I could find on personal finance, investing, and wealth creation. I sought out mentors who had achieved financial freedom. I began tracking my expenses with meticulous detail. I started looking for ways to increase my income, not just decrease my expenses. I began to see money not as an enemy to be feared, but as a tool to be mastered. Each step was small, but each was significant. Each was a declaration that the old patterns no longer had power over me. Each was a vote for the new future I envisioned. Each was a brick in the foundation of the new legacy I was building. The turning point wasn't a single moment, but a series of moments, a cascade of decisions, actions, and realizations that collectively transformed my trajectory. It began with the questions I asked myself that night at the kitchen table, but it continued with every choice I made in alignment with the vision of breaking generational curses and creating generational blessings. This is the power of a turning point. It doesn't just change your direction, it changes your destination. It doesn't just alter your path, it transforms your journey. It doesn't just modify your circumstances, it revolutionizes your identity. And that's what happened to me. The turning point didn't just change my financial situation, it changed who I was. I was no longer just a man struggling with money. I was the chosen one, called to break the financial chains of my lineage. I was no longer just a victim of generational patterns. I was the architect of a new legacy. I was no longer just carrying a burden. I was fulfilling a calling. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a process, a journey with ups and downs, victories and setbacks, moments of clarity and periods of confusion. But the turning point gave me the vision, the motivation, and the determination to stay the course, to keep moving forward even when it was hard, to keep believing even when it seemed impossible. In the next sections, I'll share with you the specific principles and practices that guided my journey, the spiritual laws that govern financial transformation, and the practical steps I took to break generational curses and create generational blessings. But it all began with that turning point, with the questions I asked myself and the vision that emerged in response. Divine selection and preparation, I began to understand that God doesn't choose a man at random. He chooses the man with a mind capable of being trained. He chooses the man who can develop definiteness of purpose. He chooses the man who can endure pressure without breaking. He chooses the one whose desire refuses to die. I was that man. The struggles I faced were not punishments. They were preparation. The financial pressure I felt was not a sign of failure. It was the refining fire that would produce the leader my family had been waiting for. Pressure does not appear to destroy a chosen man. It appears to shape him. For years, I had dismissed my visions as fantasies. I had felt guilty for wanting more. I had feared that success might distance me from my loved ones. But I came to understand that my rise was not a betrayal of my family. It was the salvation of my family. Let me elaborate on this profound realization about divine selection and preparation, because it fundamentally changed how I viewed my struggles and my calling. For years, I had seen my financial difficulties as punishments, as evidence that I was doing something wrong, that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. But I came to understand that these challenges weren't punishments at all. They were preparation. Think about it for a moment. If you were going to entrust someone with breaking generational curses and transforming a family's financial destiny, what qualities would you look for? You wouldn't choose someone who gives up easily. You wouldn't choose someone who can't handle pressure. You wouldn't choose someone whose desires fade in the face of obstacles. You would choose someone with a mind capable of being trained. Someone who can develop definiteness of purpose. Someone who can endure pressure without breaking. Someone whose desire refuses to die. That's the kind of person God chooses for this sacred work. And as I looked back on my life, I began to see how my experiences had been preparing me for this calling, even when I didn't realize it. Every financial setback had been teaching me resilience. Every moment of scarcity had been developing my hunger for something better. Every failure had been building my determination to succeed. Every disappointment had been strengthening my resolve to keep going. Every obstacle had been expanding my capacity to overcome. I realized that the financial pressure I felt wasn't a sign of failure. It was the refining fire that would produce the leader my family had been waiting for. Just as steel is tempered through heat and pressure, my character was being strengthened through adversity. Just as diamonds are formed under intense pressure, my potential was being unlocked through challenge. This understanding completely reframed my relationship with struggle. Instead of seeing difficulties as detours on my journey, I began to see them as part of the journey itself. Instead of viewing obstacles as barriers to my destination, I began to view them as stepping stones along the way. Instead of interpreting setbacks as signs to stop, I began to interpret them as invitations to grow. I also came to understand that the visions I had dismissed as fantasies were actually divine downloads, glimpses of what was possible for me and my family. For years, I had dreams of financial freedom, of making a significant impact, of leaving a different legacy. But I had dismissed these as unrealistic, as wishful thinking, as fantasies born of desperation. Now I realized that these visions weren't fantasies at all. They were previews of coming attractions. They were divine invitations to step into a larger story. They were the seeds of possibility planted in my imagination, waiting for the right conditions to germinate and grow. I had felt guilty for wanting more, especially when my family had so little. I had seen my desire for financial abundance as selfish, as materialistic, as a betrayal of my family's values of simplicity and contentment. But I came to understand that my desire for more wasn't about greed. It was about growth. It wasn't about accumulation. It was about transformation. It wasn't about personal comfort. It was about generational liberation. I had feared that success might distance me from my loved ones, that I might become arrogant or forget where I came from. I had seen examples of people who achieved wealth and lost touch with their roots, who changed in ways that alienated those who cared about them. But I came to understand that true success doesn't distance you from your loved ones. It enables you to bless them more fully. True success doesn't make you forget where you came from. It gives you the resources to transform where you're going. My rise wasn't a betrayal of my family. It was the salvation of my family. It wasn't about leaving them behind. It was about leading them forward. It wasn't about rejecting their values. It was about expanding their possibilities. This understanding of divine selection and preparation gave me a new perspective on my journey. It helped me see that my struggles weren't random or meaningless. They were purposeful and significant. It helped me understand that my challenges weren't punishments. They were preparations. It helped me recognize that my desires weren't selfish. They were sacred. I want to share with you a specific experience that deepened this understanding. About 6 months after that turning point at my kitchen table, I faced a major financial setback. I had been working a side business in addition to my regular job. I had invested a significant amount of money I really couldn't afford to lose in a project that I believed would be my breakthrough. But the project failed spectacularly, leaving me in an even worse financial position than before. In the immediate aftermath, I was devastated. I felt like a failure. I questioned whether I had heard God correctly, whether I was on the right path, whether I was deluding myself. I was tempted to give up, to go back to playing it safe, to accept that financial freedom wasn't meant for someone like me. But as I prayed and reflected on this experience, I began to see it differently. I realized that this setback had taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. It had taught me about risk management, about due diligence, about diversification. It had taught me about the importance of multiple streams of income, about the dangers of putting all my eggs in one basket. It had taught me about resilience, about picking myself up after failure, about learning from mistakes. Most importantly, it had deepened my dependence on God, my humility, my recognition that I couldn't do this alone. It had stripped away my self-reliance and forced me to lean on divine guidance and wisdom. It had refined my motives, purifying my desire for success from ego-driven ambition to purpose-driven calling. I came to understand that this setback wasn't a detour. It was part of the journey. It wasn't a punishment. It was preparation. It wasn't a barrier. It was a necessary step in my development as the chosen one who would break my family's financial chains. This experience taught me that divine selection doesn't mean a life free from challenges. In fact, it often means a life with more challenges, because the greater the calling, the greater the preparation required. The weight you carry is not just a sign of selection. It's also a tool of preparation, shaping you into the person who can fulfill the calling. I also learned that divine selection doesn't mean immediate success. It means being prepared for success in the right time and the right way. It means developing the character, wisdom, and maturity to handle the responsibilities that come with breakthrough. It means becoming the person who can not only achieve financial freedom, but sustain it, multiply it, and use it to bless others. The financial pressure I felt was not a sign of failure. It was the refining fire that would produce the leader my family had been waiting for. The challenges I faced were not obstacles to my destiny. They were the path to my destiny. The struggles I endured were not punishments. They were preparations. This understanding of divine selection and preparation became a cornerstone of my journey. It gave me meaning in the midst of difficulty, purpose in the face of pain, hope in times of hardship. It helped me see that I wasn't just going through challenges, I was growing through them. I wasn't just enduring adversity, I was being shaped by it. I wasn't just carrying a burden, I was being prepared for a calling. As I embraced this perspective, I noticed something interesting begin to happen. The challenges didn't disappear, but my fear of them did. The difficulties didn't vanish, but my anxiety about them lessened. The obstacles remained, but my ability to overcome them increased. I began to approach each challenge with a new question. What is this preparing me for? What is this teaching me? How is this shaping me into the person I need to become to fulfill my calling? This shift in perspective transformed my relationship with adversity, turning it from an enemy to be feared into an ally to be embraced. I also noticed that as I embraced this understanding of divine selection and preparation, others began to respond to me differently. They sensed a new confidence in me, a new sense of purpose, a new depth of character. They were drawn to the steadiness in my presence, the clarity in my vision, the conviction in my voice. They didn't always understand what was happening, but they could see that something was changing, that I was becoming someone different. This is the power of understanding your divine selection and preparation. It doesn't just change how you see yourself. It changes how others see you. It doesn't just transform your perspective. It transforms your presence. It doesn't just alter your mindset. It alters your reality. The first step in my transformation was understanding the burden of divine selection. I learned that the heaviest weight a man carries is not the weight placed upon his back by the world, but the weight placed upon his spirit by destiny. When a man feels a burden others do not feel, it is never accident. It is the unmistakable sign that life has chosen him for a task greater than the comforts of ordinary men. And though he may tremble beneath it, he is never given less strength than the weight requires. I had often mistaken my suffering for punishment when in truth it was preparation. No sculptor shapes marble gently, and no destiny shapes a man without fire. The struggle I bore was not because I was forsaken, but because I was needed. It was the mark of selection, the quiet whisper of the ages, declaring that my life would rewrite the fortune of those who came before me. My ancestors' struggles would stop with me, not because I was weak, but because I was the first strong enough to listen. Let me take you deeper into this understanding of the burden of divine selection, because it's fundamental to grasping the sacred nature of your calling. The weight you feel, that heaviness, that sense of responsibility, that feeling that you're carrying something others don't seem to carry, is not a burden to be resented, but a selection to be honored. Think about it for a moment. Why do some people feel this weight, while others don't? Why do some people sense a calling, while others seem content with ordinary life? Why do some people feel driven to break patterns while others unconsciously perpetuate them? The answer I've come to believe is that destiny selects certain individuals for certain tasks. Just as a sculptor selects a particular piece of marble for a particular statue, Destiny selects particular people for particular purposes. And just as the marble must be shaped and chiseled and polished to become the statue the sculptor envisions, we must be shaped and refined and prepared to fulfill the purpose destiny has for us. The weight you feel is the sign of this selection. It's the unmistakable indication that life has chosen you for a task greater than the comforts of ordinary men. It's the quiet whisper of the ages declaring that your life has a significance beyond what you can see in the moment. I had often mistaken my suffering for punishment when in truth it was preparation. I'd seen my financial struggles as evidence that I was doing something wrong, I wasn't good enough, that I was being punished for some unknown transgression. But I came to understand that these struggles weren't punishments at all. They were preparations. They were the fire that was shaping me into the person who could fulfill my calling. No sculptor shapes marble gently, and no destiny shapes a man without fire. The process of transformation is rarely comfortable. It involves pressure, heat, friction, resistance. It involves breaking down before building up. It involves unlearning before learning. It involves letting go before taking hold. The struggle I bore was not because I was forsaken, but because I was needed. It wasn't a sign that God had abandoned me. It was evidence that God had appointed me. It wasn't a mark of disfavor. It was the mark of selection. It was the quiet whisper of the ages, declaring that my life would rewrite the fortune of those who came before me. My ancestors' struggles would stop with me, not because I was weak, but because I was the first strong enough to listen. They had carried the weight as far as they could. They had endured the challenges as long as they could. They had faced the limitations with the resources they had. But I was the one who was called to take it further, to break through the barriers that had stopped them, to create a new possibility for future generations. This understanding of the burden of divine selection transformed my relationship with my struggles. Instead of seeing them as obstacles to be overcome, I began to see them as preparations to be embraced. Instead of viewing them as punishments to be endured, I began to view them as trainings to be completed. Instead of interpreting them as signs to stop, I began to interpret them as invitations to grow. I want to share with you a powerful metaphor that helped me understand this concept. Imagine a blacksmith forging a sword. The blacksmith selects a particular piece of metal for its potential to become a fine weapon. Then the blacksmith subjects that metal to intense heat, pounding it with a hammer, folding it over and over again. Heating and cooling, shaping and refining. This process is not gentle or comfortable. It's intense, painful, seemingly destructive. But without this process, the metal would remain a lump of raw potential, never becoming the sharp, strong, beautiful sword it was meant to be. In the same way, destiny selects certain individuals and subjects them to intense processes of preparation. The heat of adversity, the hammering of challenges, folding of setbacks and breakthroughs. These are not signs of rejection, but of selection. They are not punishments, but preparations. They are not obstacles, but the path to becoming who you were meant to be. The heaviest weight a man carries is not the weight placed upon his back by the world, but the weight placed upon spirit by destiny. This weight is not a burden to be resented, but a calling to be fulfilled. It's not a curse to be broken, but a selection to be honored. It's not a problem to be solved, but a purpose to be lived. And though you may tremble beneath it, you are never given less strength than the weight requires. The very fact that you feel the weight is evidence that you have the strength to carry it. The very fact that you sense the calling is proof that you have the capacity to fulfill it. The very fact that you recognize the burden is a sign that you have been chosen to bear it. This understanding of the burden of divine selection gave me a new perspective on my journey. It helped me see that my struggles weren't random or meaningless. They were purposeful and significant. It helped me understand that my challenges weren't punishments. They were preparations. It helped me recognize that my desires weren't selfish. They were sacred. It also helped me understand why I felt different from others in my family. Why I couldn't accept the status quo. Why I was driven to break patterns. It wasn't because I was better than them or more talented than them. It was because I had been selected for a different purpose, a different task, a different calling. My ancestors' struggles would stop with me, not because I was weak, but because I was the first strong enough to listen. I was the first who couldn't accept the limitations that had been passed down. I was the first who felt the weight of generational patterns strongly enough to question them. I was the first who sensed the calling to break through them strongly enough to pursue it. This is the burden and the beauty of divine selection. It sets you apart not because you're special, but because you've been selected for a special purpose. It gives you a different perspective, not because you're superior, but because you've been given a different task. It places a weight upon you, not to crush you, but to shape you into the person who can fulfill your calling. As I embraced this understanding of the burden of divine selection, I noticed something begin to shift in my life. The weight didn't disappear, but my relationship to it changed. The struggles didn't vanish, but my perspective on them transformed. The challenges remained, but my ability to face them grew. I began to see each challenge as an opportunity to develop the strength and wisdom needed to fulfill my calling. I began to view each setback as a training ground for the breakthrough that was coming. I began to approach each obstacle as a chance to demonstrate the faith and persistence required to break generational curses. I also noticed that, as I embraced this understanding, others began to respond to me differently. They sensed a new confidence in me, a new sense of purpose, a new depth of character. They were drawn to the steadiness in my presence, the clarity in my vision, the conviction in my voice. They didn't always understand what was happening, but they could see that something was changing, that I was becoming someone different. This is the power of understanding the burden of divine selection. It doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how others see you. It doesn't just transform your perspective, it transforms your presence. It doesn't just alter your mindset, it alters your reality. The struggle I bore was not because I was forsaken, but because I was needed. It was the mark of selection, the quiet whisper of the ages, declaring that my life would rewrite the fortune of those who came before me. And the same is true for you. The weight you carry is not a curse, it's a calling. The struggles you face are not punishments, they're preparations. The challenges you encounter are not obstacles. They're the path to fulfilling your divine selection. Learning from those who broke similar chains, I studied the lives of those who had broken similar chains. I read about Abraham Lincoln, born in hardship so severe that despair could have claimed any lesser soul. Yet the adversity that threatened to break him became his training. The loneliness, the failure, the repeated blows of misfortune did not curse him. They carved him. They carved a depth of character that made him fit to carry a nation. His early pain was not punishment. It was preparation for immortal duty. I saw myself in his story. I saw how my own hardships could become the foundation of my strength. I studied Andrew Carnegie, who came from a poor Scottish household where opportunity was a stranger. His childhood did not contain wealth, privilege, or guidance. His schooling was brief, his family weak, his prospects thin. Yet poverty did not bind him. It instructed him. It taught him economy, discipline, endurance, and ambition forged in fire. The very struggle he thought was his downfall became the mother of his fortune. His burden was the badge of the chosen. I realized that my own financial struggles were not a curse, but a training ground for the wealth I would eventually create. Let me take you deeper into this study of those who broke similar chains, because understanding how others transform their circumstances can provide a blueprint for your own transformation. When I was in the depths of my financial struggles, feeling overwhelmed and alone, I began to seek out stories of people who had overcome similar challenges. I needed to know that it was possible, that others had walked this path before me, that there was a way through the darkness to the light. One of the first stories that deeply resonated with me was that of Abraham Lincoln. Here was a man born into poverty so extreme that most people would have been crushed by it. His family moved frequently, trying to scratch out a living on the frontier. His mother died when he was just 9 years old. His relationship with his father was strained. He had less than a year of formal schooling. He failed in business, lost multiple elections, suffered a nervous breakdown, and was rejected by the woman he loved. Yet somehow, through all this adversity, Lincoln developed a depth of character, resilience of spirit, a clarity of purpose that enabled him to become one of America's greatest presidents. The very hardships that could have destroyed him became the foundation of his strength. The loneliness that could have embittered him became the source of his empathy. The failures that could have defeated him became the training ground for his ultimate success. What struck me most about Lincoln's story was how his early pain prepared him for his later purpose. The poverty he experienced gave him a heart for the common person. The losses he endured gave him a sensitivity to the suffering of others. The political defeats he faced gave him the humility to listen to different perspectives. The personal tragedies he experienced gave him the wisdom to navigate a divided nation. His early pain was not punishment. It was preparation for immortal duty. The adversity that threatened to break him became his training. The loneliness, the failure, the repeated blows of misfortune did not curse him. They carved him. They carved a depth of character that made him fit to carry a nation. As I studied Lincoln's life, I saw myself in his story. I saw how my own hardships could become the foundation of my strength. I saw how my financial struggles could prepare me for the calling to break my family's generational curses. I saw how the very challenges that seemed to be holding me back could actually be propelling me forward. The second story that deeply impacted me was that of Andrew Carnegie. Born in a poor Scottish household, Carnegie's family immigrated to America when he was a child, seeking opportunity but finding only more hardship. His father struggled to find work, and young Andrew had to start working in a factory at the age of 12, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. For just $1.20 a week, his childhood did not contain wealth, privilege, or guidance. His schooling was brief, his family weak, his prospects thin. Yet poverty did not bind him. It instructed him. It taught him economy, discipline, endurance, and ambition forged in fire. The very struggle he thought was his downfall became the mother of his fortune. What fascinated me about Carnegie's story was how he transformed his circumstances through mindset and strategy. Despite his limited education, he became a voracious reader, educating himself in libraries after long days of work. Despite his meager earnings, he developed a habit of saving and investing, recognizing the power of compound interest. Despite his low position, he cultivated relationships with influential people, learning from their experience and wisdom. Carnegie understood that wealth was not just about working hard, it was about working smart. He recognized that success was not just about individual effort. It was about leverage and systems. He realized that financial freedom was not just about earning more. It was about managing what you earn wisely. His burden was the badge of the chosen. The poverty he experienced, the hardships he endured, the limitations he faced, these were not curses to be resented, but selections to be honored. They were the very things that prepared him for his destiny as one of the wealthiest industrialists in history. As I studied Carnegie's life, I realized that my own financial struggles were not a curse, but a training ground for the wealth I would eventually create. The scarcity I experienced was teaching me the value of resourcefulness. The limitations I faced were developing my creativity. The challenges I encountered were strengthening my resilience. The mistakes I made were providing me with valuable lessons. These stories and many others like them became my teachers, my mentors, my guides. They showed me that adversity is not the enemy, but the path to strength. They demonstrated that hardship is not a barrier, but a preparation for breakthrough. They proved that the weight I carried was not a curse, but a calling. I want to share with you a specific practice that helped me internalize these lessons. I created what I called a transformation journal, where I would write about the challenges I was facing and then research how people like Lincoln, Carnegie, and others had faced similar challenges. I would identify the principles they applied, the mindsets they adopted, the strategies they used, and then I would look for ways to apply those same principles, mindsets, and strategies to my own situation. For example, when I was struggling with a business failure, I studied how Lincoln handled his numerous political defeats. I learned that he didn't see defeats as final verdicts on his worth or potential, but as valuable feedback and opportunities for growth. He analyzed what went wrong, learned from his mistakes, adjusted his approach, and tried again with renewed determination. I applied this same approach to my business failure, treating it not as a reason to give up, but as a lesson to learn from. When I was feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of my financial challenges, I studied how Carnegie approached his ambitious goals. I learned that he broke down large goals into smaller, manageable steps. He focused on what he could do each day to move closer to his objectives. He surrounded himself with people who could help him achieve his vision. I applied these same principles to my financial situation, creating a step-by-step plan, focusing on daily actions, and seeking guidance from those who had achieved what I wanted. This practice of studying those who had broken similar chains became a cornerstone of my transformation. It provided me with inspiration when I felt discouraged, with guidance when I felt lost, with hope when I felt hopeless. It showed me that my circumstances were not unique or insurmountable, that others had faced similar challenges and overcome them, that there was a proven path to transformation. I also discovered something interesting as I studied these stories. I noticed that those who successfully broke generational patterns shared certain characteristics, certain mindsets, certain approaches. They had a clear sense of purpose that drove them through challenges. They had a growth mindset that saw obstacles as opportunities. They had a resilience that enabled them to persevere through setbacks. They had a willingness to learn and adapt. They had a faith in something greater than themselves that gave them strength and guidance. These characteristics became my model, my template, my aspiration. I began to cultivate them deliberately, knowing that they were essential to breaking my own generational curses. I worked on clarifying my purpose, developing a growth mindset, building resilience, embracing learning, and deepening my faith. What I learned from studying those who broke similar chains is that transformation is not accidental. It's intentional. It's not random. It's systematic. It's not mysterious. It's based on principles that can be learned and applied. The adversity that threatened to break Lincoln became his training. The poverty that could have bound Carnegie became his instruction. The very struggles they thought were their downfall became the foundation of their success. Their burdens were the badges of the chosen. And the same is true for you. The challenges you face, the limitations you encounter, the hardships you endure, these are not curses to be resented, but selections to be honored. They are not obstacles to your destiny, but the path to your destiny. They are not punishments for your mistakes, but preparations for your purpose. The prison of poverty mindset, I learned that the prison of poverty is not built from coins, but from belief. A man poor in purse may rise swiftly, but a man poor in thought remains trapped even when gold touches his hand. I had inherited not the lack of money, but the lack of the laws which create money. This was the true generational burden. Not debt, but misunderstanding. Not scarcity, but confusion. Yet within this inheritance lay my advantage. For the man who sees his chains sees also the key. I was no longer blind to the patterns that governed those before me. I saw the fear they walked with. I saw the hesitation that stopped their steps. I saw the silence that kept them small. And because I saw it, I could break it. Awareness was the first strike of the hammer upon the old lock. Let me take you deeper into this understanding of the prison of poverty mindset. Because recognizing and breaking free from this prison is essential to transforming your financial destiny. For years, I had believed that poverty was primarily about money, about not having enough of it. But I came to understand that the real prison of poverty is not built from coins, but from beliefs. Not from lack of resources, but from lack of understanding. A man poor in purse may rise swiftly, but a man poor in thought remains trapped even when gold touches his hand. I've seen this happen countless times. People who come into money through inheritance, lottery winnings, or sudden success, only to lose it all and end up in the same or worse financial position. Why? Because their mindset hasn't changed. Their beliefs about money, about themselves, about what's possible remain the same. They may have temporarily changed their financial circumstances, but they haven't transformed their financial identity. I had inherited not the lack of money, but the lack of the laws which create money. This was the true generational burden. Not debt, but misunderstanding. Not scarcity, but confusion. My family had passed down to me not just financial struggles, but financial ignorance. They had taught me, through their words and actions, their beliefs and behaviors, a set of principles about money that were fundamentally flawed. They had taught me that money is hard to come by. They had taught me that you have to work hard for every penny. They had taught me that debt is dangerous. They had taught me that rich people are greedy or lucky. They had taught me that talking about money is inappropriate. They had taught me that wanting more than you have is selfish. They had taught me that security is more important than opportunity. They had taught me that playing it safe is wiser than taking risks. These beliefs formed the walls of my prison, the bars of my financial cage. They limited my possibilities before I even explored them. They shaped my decisions before I even made them. They determined my outcomes before I even took action. Yet within this inheritance lay my advantage. For the man who sees his chains sees also the key. The moment I recognized that my financial struggles were rooted in my mindset, not just my circumstances, I found the key to freedom. The moment I understood that I had inherited flawed beliefs about money, I gained the power to change them. I was no longer blind to the patterns that governed those before me. I saw the fear they walked with, fear of risk, fear of failure, fear of not having enough. I saw the hesitation that stopped their steps, hesitation to invest, hesitation to pursue opportunities, hesitation to step out of their comfort zone. I saw the silence that kept them small, silence around money, silence around dreams, silence around possibilities. And because I saw it, I could break it. Awareness was the first strike of the hammer upon the old lock. Recognition was the first step toward transformation. Understanding was the beginning of freedom. Let me share with you some specific examples of how this poverty mindset manifested in my life and how I began to break free from it. One of the most powerful limiting beliefs I inherited was what I call the scarcity mentality, the belief that there's never enough, that resources are limited, that if someone else has more, it means less for me. This mentality showed up in various ways in my life. I was always afraid of spending money, even on things that would improve my life or increase my earning potential. I saw every purchase as a reduction rather than an investment. I was jealous of others' success, seeing it as a threat rather than an inspiration. I was constantly worried about running out, even when I had enough for my immediate needs. Breaking free from this scarcity mentality involved deliberately cultivating an abundance mentality, the belief that there's more than enough, that resources can be created, that one person's success doesn't diminish another's. I started by practicing gratitude for what I had, recognizing that abundance was already present in my life. I began to celebrate others' success, seeing it as proof of what's possible. I started to view money as a tool for creation, not just consumption. I began to look for ways to create value, not just preserve what I had. Another limiting belief I inherited was what I call the hard work fallacy, the belief that working hard is enough to create. My family prided themselves on being hard workers, and they were, but they never achieved financial freedom because hard work alone is not enough. Wealth is created not just through effort, but through strategy, not just through labor, but through leverage, not just through activity, but through productivity. Breaking free from this hard work fallacy involved understanding that working smart is as important as working hard. I began to focus on results, not just hours. I started to look for ways to leverage my time, money, and expertise. I learned to build systems that could generate income even when I wasn't actively working. I shifted from trading time for money to creating value that could multiply. A third limiting belief I inherited was what I call the risk aversion, the belief that safety is more important than opportunity, that it's better to avoid loss than to pursue gain. This belief kept my family from investing, from starting businesses, from stepping out of their financial comfort zone. They preferred the certainty of small, predictable returns to the possibility of larger, less certain ones. Breaking free from this risk aversion involved understanding the difference between foolish risks and calculated risks. I learned that all progress involves risk, but not all risks are equal. I began to educate myself about investing, about diversification, about risk management. I started taking small calculated risks and gradually expanding my comfort zone. I learned to see risk not as something to be avoided, but as something to be managed. A fourth limiting belief I inherited was what I call the financial silence, the belief that money is a taboo subject, that it's inappropriate to talk about finances, that financial matters should be kept private. This silence prevented my family from learning about money, from seeking guidance, from sharing wisdom. It kept us isolated in our financial struggles. Breaking free from this financial silence involved opening up conversations about money. I started talking openly with my spouse about our financial goals and challenges. I sought out mentors who could guide me. I joined communities where financial matters were discussed openly. I became willing to ask questions, to admit what I didn't know, to learn from others' experience. These are just a few examples of the poverty mindset I inherited and how I began to break free from it. The process wasn't easy or quick. It involved unlearning beliefs that had been ingrained in me since childhood. It required challenging patterns that had been passed down through generations. It demanded confronting fears that had become part of my identity. But the rewards were transformational. As I broke free from the prison of poverty mindset, I began to see new possibilities, to make different choices, to create different results. My financial circumstances began to change as my financial mindset changed. My outer world transformed as my inner world transformed. The prison of poverty is not built from coins, but from belief. A man poor in purse may rise swiftly, but a man poor in thought remains trapped even when gold touches his hand. The key to financial freedom is not just earning more money, but transforming your mindset about money. It's not just changing your circumstances, but changing your identity. It's not just breaking external patterns, but breaking internal limitations. For the man who sees his chains, sees also the key. The moment you recognize the poverty mindset that has been holding you captive, you find the power to break free. The moment you understand the limiting beliefs that have been shaping your financial reality, you gain the ability to change them. The moment you see the patterns that have been governing your family's financial story, you become the one who can rewrite it. Awareness is the first strike of the hammer upon the old lock. Recognition is the first step toward transformation. Understanding is the beginning of freedom. And as you continue this journey of awareness and transformation, you'll discover that the prison of poverty mindset, once so confining, begins to crumble, revealing a path to financial freedom that was there